States Congress, and to sit there and to watch this propaganda machine, this complex, mock you in that way. Can you take me back to that afternoon?
Well, sure. I had just resigned. This hearing was on September 3rd, and I had resigned around 10 days prior to that. And so to be invited to speak before a joint session of the Senate Armed Forces Committee and Foreign Relations Committee, they had never met in joint session before. So this is literally making history. Um, and for me, who is somebody who had avoided the spotlight as a weapons inspector, my job wasn't to be a media star. My job was to carry out inspections and stay out of the media. To suddenly be thrust into this grand stage, and I'm somebody who takes the Constitution very seriously. I take government very seriously, and this was a huge, huge deal for me to be able to testify before the U.S. Senate. And I was warned ahead of time that this was going to become a very partisan political battle. And I was also warned that Joe Biden has a tendency to make things personal, and that my best option would be to just sit there and shut up while he speaks and not say anything. And if you look at my face, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just sitting there and shutting up. What I will say is this: he made his points that they were political. He was not happy with the hearing, not happy that I was being brought forward. It was originally intended that Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, and William Cohen, the Secretary of Defense, would testify with me. That would be three of us on the stage. They refused because they knew that I knew what I knew. And what I meant by that is, I wasn't some outsider. I had been to the State Department. I had been to the White House. I had been to the Pentagon. I had been in all the briefings. I was the insider. I knew everything. And so they couldn't sit there before the Senate and lie and spin that I would be there like the conscience they didn't want to admit they have, and remind them, no, you said this on this day. No, you said this on this day. No, you guys promised this on this day. No, you're lying, Madam Secretary. You're lying, Mr. Secretary. And so they opted out. And Biden wanted to cancel the whole hearings. He didn't want this to just be a stage where the Clinton administration would be attacked. My job wasn't to attack the Clinton administration. My job was to remind the United States Senate that back in 1991, they had supported a Security Council resolution calling for the disarmament of Iraq. And now the U.S. government was preventing the inspectors from doing their job. And I was holding that up to them. I was the mirror holding their own words, their own promises, their own guarantees in their face. And Biden was uncomfortable about it. It was a tough afternoon. I've never been, I've operated at fairly high levels, but never in such a contentious environment before. So it was a unique experience for me. I will say this: Biden was attacked heavily by the media, by everybody afterwards. So he went over the bound. He was rude. He made it personal. And he wrote an op-ed apologizing, and then he invited me back to his office. A couple weeks later, we spent about an hour on a one-on-one discussion. He wrote me a nice letter afterwards saying it was a great discussion, and that this was an issue that was going to continue to be of importance. And he had hoped that I would be able to talk with him in the future. Well, guess what, Joe? I tried talking to you in 2000, 2002. You didn't want to talk. Joe Biden doesn't want to talk. Joe Biden doesn't want to learn. Joe Biden doesn't want to have a conversation. Joe Biden wants to own the stage and chastise people, dictate to people, pontificate. That's who Joe Biden is, but or at least that's who he was back then. But that was an interesting afternoon. I learned a lot about the U.S. Senate and how it operates, and about the politics behind the grand stage that's presented to the American people.
Well, we're seeing another grand stage that's being presented to the American people right now. And I've talked to a number of individuals who've been inside the government, former intelligence officers, et cetera, who've said they currently, and I'll get you to weigh in on this, give me your perspective, what we saw then, manufacturing consent for war in Iraq, in some ways pales in comparison to the propaganda that we're seeing in the war in Ukraine. Now, I'll set that out there and tell me, maybe it's just the prevalence of social media, et cetera, but what sort of similarities do you see in the run up to the war in Iraq and then into the run up to the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think you touched on it with what the two words is social media. Back in 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, we didn't have Twitter. We didn't have, I mean, I can't remember if we had Facebook or not. But the way you got your information was on via television, via radio. You could either watch, 24-hour news. You could watch the big, the big three: ABC, CBS, NBC. You could tune into C-SPAN and get the actual hearing if you wanted to watch that. But it took a little bit of effort for the American public to access information, and because it took effort, I think the American public was more discerning, meaning that those who were seeking to manipulate, manufacture, misinform had to actually work at it. They had to go through the motions of trying to be responsible, trying to be objective, trying to get data out there. Telling the lie and selling the lie wasn't as easy as it is today. I think that the lies that were told back then were very complex lies, and in ways it makes what they did much more nefarious, because it required an effort to distort information, to manufacture consent as we speak. Today we have the best we can hope for in terms of quality news is a 24-hour news cycle which delivers the antithesis of quality news. It's entertainment. It's reactive. It's not proactive. It's not informative. It's designed to catch your attention, hold your attention for 30 seconds, 3 minutes. And then we supplement this with social media, with Twitter, with Telegram, with YouTube, with Facebook, with whatever platforms people use. And it's instant gratification, instant information, instant analysis, which means that you can be instantly lied to, instantly manipulated. Data can be instantly manufactured. There's no effort. And we see this. I mean, with this Ukraine thing, there's two things that have stood out to me. One, the National Security Council has admitted that they have deliberately declassified intelligence information so it can be released to the public, even though they know the intelligence information being released is wrong, inaccurate, not fully developed. They're releasing it not to inform people, but to shape perceptions. And then we get even more shocking when General Nakasone, the head of the National Security Agency, says not only does he immediately declassify and release information, he releases it specifically to CNN so that they can immediately shine a light on an issue. This means that CNN, a ostensible news network, is literally nothing more than an extension of the American intelligence community, which we now know is not in the business of informing policymakers, but misinforming American citizens. That's literally what they said they do. They misinform us to create perception, not to discuss reality. That's the big difference. Back in the day, they had to work to tell the lie. Now they just lie. They admit they're lying, and there's no consequence. The American people are silent on this. Literally, this is one of the biggest issues that it is a frontal assault on democracy. Democracy is about an informed citizenry that can hold their elected officials accountable for what they do in their name. But when your elected officials just right up say to your face, we're lying to you. We're lying to you. We expect you to swallow the lie. We expect you to accept the lie without question. And the American people sit there and do that. They're just saying, okay, you're using CNN to feed us lies. Okay, it's not okay.
It's disgusting. And you talked about the sanctity of the Constitution, which what's left of it at this point? I mean, you see literally this deep state. I mean, we throw that term around. I think it absolutely exists. And you can,
It exists.
I mean, they're, as you point out, they're literally handing. I mean, back in the day, we talk about this on the show a lot, back in the 70s, right? The CIA, the military industrial complex itself used to try to infiltrate newsrooms nefariously, right? And now they're literally on the payroll at CNN and MSNBC. General, we want to bring in General Watcha to get your perspective. And every time, and we play clips constantly here on this show, that every time they bring a general on to, well, we need to keep sending more weapons. We need to keep them in the fight. So it's constant manufacturing consent for war. And now they're on the payroll at CNN. They're not even trying to nefariously infiltrate the newsroom. They're being paid by these guys.
The generals, the former intelligence analysts, and it's a revolving door. I mean, look in the case of John Psaki, the press spokesman for the White House. She was a CNN paid talking. First, she was a State Department person under Obama. Then during Trump, she came and worked at CNN. So she's on air playing politics, and she's just out there doing her thing, which is okay. Okay, everybody's allowed to be political. I mean, that's what makes this country great, I believe, is the ability to have different points of view and have civil discourse, debate, dialogue, hash it out so that people can be informed by all perspectives. I have no problem with her being on CNN doing what she did. But then she transitions to the White House back under Biden. And I had a hard time saying, well, wait a minute, how do you make that transition so smoothly? And I'm supposed to believe your objective, only to see that you transition back to mainstream media. It's this revolving door between government and what's supposed to be civil society. But we've seen that the barriers have been broken down. It's not just in the media. We see the barriers are broken down in industry where generals can leave, active service and immediately go to a board of a major, defense industry company where their connections, their contacts, you can't tell me that doesn't influence why they were recruiting, what is expected from them, and then immediately transition back into civilian leadership. And if you look at the Constitution, you need to understand that that's a big deal because the military is obligated under the Constitution to take the orders of its civilian leadership. We were never designed to be a military dictatorship. We were never designed to have a political military. Our military was always supposed to be apolitical, not getting involved in domestic politics. And yet when you have this war taking place where generals leave to industry and then go back to be civilian leadership, you have to understand that while the generals are trying to become generals, their thought isn't how do I best serve my country? Their thought is how do I best position myself to get into that revolving door, which means they've lost perspective, they've lost focus, they're not doing the job they were supposed to do. We've corrupted the military establishment, we've corrupted government, we've corrupted media, and frankly speaking, we've corrupted the American people because we've stopped behaving as citizens. We're now just a bunch of clones and drones, standing before whatever platform we want, staring at it and nodding compliantly. You spoke of the Constitution, the sanctity of the Constitution. I'll leave you with this. How do you defend that which you do not know? Because ultimately, the ultimate defender of the Constitution is the American citizen. The Supreme Court has said all along that that Constitution belongs to the people. It's up to the people to make that Constitution relevant. How many Americans here could take a test and pass a test on the Constitution? We require that of everybody who wants to become a citizen. If you're from a foreign country, you want to come to this country, you want to become a citizen, you have to take a basic test on the Constitution. It's a pass-fail. If you fail, you don't get your citizenship. How many Americans that were born in this country were gifted with the gift of citizenship, know their Constitution sufficiently to pass that test? And I'll put this out there. I'll bet you right now, without any study, 90% of Americans would fail that test, which means they fail as Americans, which means they don't qualify to be Americans except by their birthright. And this means that the Constitution is going to die a death of neglect. Because if we, the people who own this Constitution, who are supposed to defend this Constitution, through our actions as citizens, don't understand the Constitution, we're defending nothing.
I think it comes down to ignorance. It comes down to a lack of education and a lack of transparency. And I think, well, that's just one big piece of it. But I think just seeing the silencing of voices who are trying to get out the truth. We've seen this now with the massive tech oligarchy, which basically just runs interference for Washington. The power center, I believe, in many ways, is now run out of Silicon Valley. You've been silenced. Your voice has been squashed. I want to kind of provide some context here. Currently, we know you're being silenced, right? But back then you were being silenced. You were saying we did not find weapons, right? We did not find weapons of mass destruction. What were you hearing in Washington? What were people telling you then? This is pre-social media. Scott, you've got to shut up. You can't tell people this. What were people saying to you?
Before I resigned from the UN, I was very well linked, not liked, but linked to the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And the day I wrote my letter of resignation, it was known that I was going to resign. The CIA, for want of a better word, station chief out of the U.S. Mission in New York. There's a CIA officer there who advises the ambassador and coordinates with relevant UN agencies on matters of importance to the U.S. government. His name was Larry Sanchez. I can say that now because he's no longer in active service. Nice guy. I like Larry. Larry and I got along well. We were friends, and we had worked for many years on a very difficult subject, which was trying to disarm Iraq. He called me and he said, are you going to deliver your letter to Richard Butler, the chairman? I said, yeah, I thought about it. I have no choice. I have to do this. The U.S. government is interfering with with my work, with the work of the inspectors. I can't do my job anymore in good faith, et cetera. He said, would you be willing to take a call from the National Security Council? I said, sure, Larry, I'll take that call. So the call came in. It was from a senior guy. It wasn't the National Security Advisor, but somebody on the National Security Council. And he basically begged me not to resign. He said, look, if you resign, you'll destroy the inspections. The inspections don't work without you. And you'll create a huge political problem for us. We need you to stay. And I said, okay, look, I'm not in the business of creating problems for the U.S. government, but you have to understand why I'm resigning, and you have to respect that. Meaning that if I stay, you have to do something that changes the reasons why I'm resigning. You have to stop interfering with the work of the inspectors. And he said, well, that's going to take time. And I said, so basically you're telling me that if I stay in, I'm still not going to be allowed to do my job. Well, we're willing to, I said, it's a yes or no question. He said, well, no, you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. There will have to be changes. I said, well, then I have no choice. I have to resign. I hung up the phone. And Larry said, okay. Said, you and I are friends. We get along well. He said, but the moment you leave that door, our friendship is over because I'll never be allowed to talk to you again. I said, well, Larry, that's too bad, but you and I are both adults. We understand these things. And he said, and I also want to tell you right now, the moment you walk out that door, the U.S. government's going to sick the FBI on you, and they are going to you in the for the rest of your life. I said, really? You're threatening me with the FBI? He said, I'm not threatening you, Scott. I'm CIA. I'm warning you that the guns are already loaded, the dogs are already on the leash, and the second you turn in that letter of resignation, they're coming at you with everything. They're going to ruin your life. And I went, well, I guess we're just going to have to see how that plays out. But I remembered that forever now, and literally, I mean, they are going to you in the. That is a quote from a senior CIA official warning me about what the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an American law enforcement agency, was going to do to an American citizen for exercising his legitimate right to oppose American interference in the work of United Nations inspectors. And you know what? Larry was 100% correct, because the FBI has spent the past 20 some odd years doing their best to me, and they haven't succeeded. I mean, they've made my life difficult at times, but here I am. They're not kicking down my door because we do have a constitution that still has some viability left in it. But I'm just saying that, that attitude, for instance, after I resigned, I couldn't get a job with any think tanks because one of the things the FBI did is immediately initiate an espionage investigation against me. They accused me of spying for the state of Israel, which is interesting because from 1994 to 1998, I was the chief liaison between the United Nations and Israel on matters of extreme sensitivity. But every single thing I did was pre-cleared with the CIA, meaning we had meetings with the CIA saying, I'm going to Israel, this is what I'm going to do, this is the information that's going to be shared, et cetera. And the CIA knew this. The CIA chief counsel had written a letter to the FBI saying, you guys do understand that Ritter's kept us in the loop, that this is, we know about this, he's not breaking any crimes. The FBI went, fuck you, we're charging him. They did charge Mary Jo White, the big name at the time in the Southern District of New York, who never lost a case, who never initiated a case that didn't end with a bad guy in jail. He initiated a case against me. And they were charging me with a crime that has the death penalty. The death penalty. Now, America doesn't put people to death, but imagine being a law-abiding U.S. citizen being told you're being investigated for a crime that if you're found guilty, a government could kill you. Now, I knew I was innocent. They knew I was innocent, but they started a process that was designed to, A, deny me employment, and B, cost me an awful lot of money defending myself. They succeeded on both fronts. They denied me employment. Nobody would hire me. All the think tanks that said, hey, we like what you're doing, we'd like to bring you on, they were told if you hire a guy who's under investigation from the FBI for espionage, you'll lose all of your U.S. government money, all that money that goes to subsidize think tanks. So None of them would hire me. And then, yes, I had to hire a lawyer because you don't interface with Mary Jo White, pro se. You have to get a lawyer. Lawyers cost money. And over years, lawyers cost a lot of money. Eventually, the FBI dropped everything because they had nothing. But it took 5 years. It took 5 years for the FBI to drop that investigation. And that's the sort of thing that.
How did your family deal with that?
Well, look, I'm still married, and my kids love me. So we obviously
you got through it. Yeah,
we did well. But no, I mean, I think my wife will tell you that these were some of the most troubling years. I mean, it's not about love. It's not about our personal relationship. It's about our financial health. I mean, The stresses that are brought on by not knowing how you're going to pay the bills next month. Not knowing if your husband's if the FBI is going to kick down the door and drag your husband out, make him disappear. Not knowing if you're going to be able to continue to be employed because now, imagine going to work and turning on the TV turning on the TV at night and having Dan Rather say, Scott Ritter is under investigation from the FBI for espionage against the state of Israel. Then going to work the next morning and have everybody look at you saying, your husband's a spy. I mean, imagine that life. Imagine being kids going to school, having to, have people say, hey, you're a spy. I mean, it's tough. But you know what? I have one hell of a family. I have one hell of a wife. I have two fantastic daughters. And at the time, we also had my wife's parents from the Republic of Georgia. They were refugees because of the Civil War. It's a different story. But they were living with us, too. And we had very supportive in-laws living with us. I had very supportive relatives and friends, people who knew this is garbage. And when you have a support network like that, you can get through just about anything. And believe me, I got through a lot. But I have a great support network that starts with my wife, starts with my kids, and continues on through friends and family. And, I think I emerged stronger from it. So nice try, FBI. It didn't work.
So then you get the other side of it, which is, Silicon Valley and the big tech oligarchs who try to silence you and so as you're trying to get out the information about the Iraq war and what you're not finding in Iraq, and they're manufacturing this, consent for this war, this endless war, which cost millions of lives, and wouldn't listen to you. And then we transition now to present times where we're looking at manufacturing consent for endless, proxy wars around the world. And I believe your Twitter account was shut down. You've been silenced a number of times. Talk about that angle. What did you say on Twitter that was so controversial that they decided to take you down and silence you?
Well, let's back up a little bit. Even back in the day, before pre-Twitter, I was hired by NBC to be a full-time on-air consultant back in 1998. And I can't, I don't know how they always do their contracts, but in my case, it was 6-month recurring contract. And at one point in that contract, I was in the NBC, the Brain Trust in New York City, 40 Rock, and we were discussing, the next week's news cycle and all this kind of stuff. And they had a reporter named Claire Shipman, who was the White House reporter. And every Sunday, Sandy Berger, who is the national security advisor, would hold one of these White House briefings that was off the record, meaning that, it was an anonymous government source. And the purpose of the briefing was to set the stage for the week's news cycle, that he would highlight what's important, what's not important, what the U.S. government wanted to get across, et cetera. And all the compliant little White House reporters would be there, and they'd ask questions, et cetera. So I said, you guys want to play a game? They said, what's the game? I said, we want to play a game called Sandy Berger is a Dirty, Rotten Liar. And they said, how are we going to play that game? I said, simple. I'm going to give you a list of questions. Ask him these questions. It's a question tree. So ask the question. He's going to give you one of two answers. Depending on the answer he gives you, ask a follow-on question. And I guarantee within 5 questions, you will have caught him in a lie. And they were like, okay. So I gave it, and Shipman did it. And Berger got caught in his lie, and he got angry. And he stopped her. He said, I know Scott Ritter is giving you these questions. Of course he knew, because I was the only person who knew the answers to the question. And he said, if you continue to use him in this way, you will be banned from these meetings. I mean, he's threatening to kick out the NBC White House correspondent from a meeting because she's asking questions. And I thought, when I heard this, wow, this is awesome. NBC obviously is going to rally behind me in the concept of free speech, et cetera. I was fired within a week. So that's that. Another one, I was hired by Fox News after 9/11, be an on-air consultant. I don't know why they hired me, but they did. Same thing, 6-month contract. I was on Bill O'Reilly's show early on. I was on all the big shows because I was supposed to be the big name for this thing. And I come on the show, and he's like, next, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, is going to talk to us about how Iraq is reconstituting its nuclear weapons program and what a threat Iraq poses to the world. I turned to Bill and I said, Bill, that's exactly the opposite of what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you that Iraq doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. They pose no threat worthy of war, et cetera. And he was so mad, irritated, et cetera. The bottom line is his response was the response of Fox News. We can't put this guy on air. But they had me on contract. So what they did, rather than release me from contract, they continued to pay me. I don't mind taking that check. Gave it to my wife. We paid some bills, but I wasn't allowed to go on air. I wasn't allowed to go on any competitors. So they basically silenced me for the duration of that contract. So that's how they used to work in the old days. Now, I started the Twitter account on a lark. My daughter, we were talking about a book that I had just had published. She said, the best way to get attention on the book is, open up a Twitter account and start talking about your book. People follow you and all this stuff. I went, I'm not into that. I don't want to do that. She said, no, you got to do it. So I started the Twitter account. I mean, it was, I get 5 followers, all family members. And then, a month later, I got 14 followers. Wow, I'm happy. 6 months later, I'm up to 50, but it was work. I mean, you're interacting with people, you're talking, you're building, followers, and you're following people. And after a couple of years, I think I was, resting at around a solid 12,000 followers. And I don't know. I mean, Elon Musk has said many of those are bots, and many of those probably were bots. So I don't know how many legitimate people they were, but it was a solid 12,000 follower account. And then the war starts, and I start saying things, I start publishing things, and people are paying attention to it. And the account is growing, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 60,000, 90,000. It was on the cusp of hitting 100,000. I'm talking about the trajectory. I don't know what the upper limit would have been, but we're the trajectory of followers were just going sky high. And I think that scared some people because, I did one tweet on it's a 16 thread tweet on, what I call Big Arrow War, talking about, the Russian strategy, trying to explain what happened in Kiev, et cetera. If within 2 days it had what's called 3 million 3 million
retweets or
no,
impressions.
Impressions. 3 million. I don't know what an impression is, but there were 3 million of them. And that apparently scared whoever runs the algorithms, because right after that, they banned me. And what they banned me for, I didn't violate any rules. The rule they listed was that I was harassing people. I wasn't harassing anybody. The violation makes no sense, but I think basically Twitter, which had taken a very pro-Ukrainian stance, found that I was a threat to that stance, and so they silenced me, and I continue to be silenced.
Well, we've experienced the same thing on some of the similar stories on our channel, and their reasoning is hilarious. And when you go through the appeal process, it's ridiculous, and it's worthless to even try the appeal because you can't get anyone to follow up and to give you evidence as to what exactly they're claiming is factual. They can't provide that. And, that's what you're up against. So these voices get silenced. I've seen this past week friends of ours getting silenced left and right. But there seems to be, and I want you to talk about maybe the shift now that we're seeing in Ukraine, because I want to put this up on the screen. So this was this week. This was in the New York Times, and we're seeing a few New York Times pieces over the past few days, over the past week, which I was surprised by. I have no respect for the New York Times, but this caught my eye. U.S. lacks a clear picture of Ukraine's war strategy, officials say. And so we did this on the show last week, where we went through and analyzed and looked at a number of the different voices in this piece, talking about how U.S. officials basically can't get any accurate information about, like Beth Sanner, a former senior intelligence official, says, "How much do we really know about how Ukraine is doing?" said Beth Sanner, a former senior intelligence official. "Can you find a person who will tell you with confidence how many troops that Ukraine has lost? How many pieces of equipment has Ukraine lost? And yet we continue to funnel billions of dollars in weapons to them. We don't know where they're going. We do know a large number of them are ending up on the black market, according to reports that we've shared. But they're not getting accurate information from the Ukrainian government. But the New York Times is now reporting on this. Are you starting to see a narrative change in some of this coverage?"
Yeah, it was inevitable. War is first of all, it's a dirty business. I mean, I don't think there's so many people that haven't a clue what war is and what war is about. We, the American people, have become used to instant victory. And what I mean by that, of course, it's hard to say instant victory when we lost the war in Iraq, we lost the war in Afghanistan, but we were used to what I call small arrow war, meaning that we could send a patrol out to a village, kick down the door, kill a couple insurgents, kill a whole bunch of innocent civilians, but call them, supporters of the insurgency, and the patrol returns. That's a victory. That's a little minor, yay, we won. We sent out a patrol. We killed some people. We came back. We won. Yay, we flew people into Pakistan. We killed Osama bin Laden. They came back. Yay, we're winning. We're winning. We're winning. So we're expecting instant results like that. And we're getting it. We're not seeing the big picture that we're actually losing the war because we're not changing the arrows on the ground. But big arrow war is about two big military forces coming together and then grinding it out. And while they're grinding it out, you can spin it just about any way you want. And so what happened here, we tend to forget that Ukraine had a very, very big army. A big army, wow. 260,000 active duty forces, backed up by hundreds of thousands of reservists and territorial defense. Russia came in with a significant number of troops, 200,000, but they didn't come in with the full strength. So we have a special military operation with limited military resources on the part of Russia coming up against a very large, well-trained, well-equipped NATO, pro-NATO military in Ukraine, and going head-to-head. So while that's happening, it can be spun any way you want to spin it. And that's what, we now know that the Ukrainian government has been lying since day one about their casualties. The Russians came out early on and said, look, we're killing them at a rate of 1 to 6. For every Russian goes down, we're knocking off 6 Ukrainians. Everybody, no, it's garbage. It's the opposite. For every Ukrainian going down, there's 6 Russians going down. But they provided no evidence to back that up. Same thing with equipment. We saw lots of videos of destroyed Russian equipment. And guess what? When when your army goes up against one of the largest armies in Europe, the Ukrainian army, it's well equipped, well trained, well led with very lethal weapons, you're going to lose equipment, you're going to lose men, and sometimes you leave them on the battlefield and videotapes are taken. That doesn't mean you're losing the war. It just means that there's this grinding process taking place. And so we were subjected to this propaganda about how Ukraine is winning, Russia's losing. And one of the goals and objectives of this propaganda was to shape public perception inside Russia. Because remember, at the same time this was happening, we were imposing the world's worst sanctions on Russia. We're going to break the Russian economy and thereby break the Russian spirit. The Russian people were going to be starving. They're going to, have no homes. They were going to have no energy. They were going to be in the streets rioting against Vladimir Putin, who would have to withdraw his defeated army from Ukraine. There was this whole process going on. None of it was true. The Russian economy wasn't collapsing. The sanctions backfired onto Europe and the United States. Putin is stronger today than he's ever been, but we can't tell the truth. We have to continue to lie. And one of the biggest lies was that Ukraine was winning the war. Now, you can tell that lie for a while in the grinding process, but eventually one side, when you start with big conflict, study World War II, the big battles that were fought between the United States and Germany, the Soviet Union and Germany. The battles were won with casualty ratios of 1 to 1.2, 1 to 1.4. That means that for every American going down, we're killing 1.2 Germans, which means eventually we grind them down and we're able to push them back like that.
Right, like the Battle of the Bulge, like a great
Battle of the
example.
Bulge and things of that nature. The big battles that the Soviets fought against the Germans. It wasn't one-sided. The Germans killed a lot of Soviets. It was very bloody fighting. But what's happening in Ukraine is this grinding's taking place, but the Ukrainians are getting ground down at a quicker rate. And what we're seeing on the battlefield right now is that the Russians aren't just defeating them and pushing them back, they're grinding them down to nothing. And the Ukrainians are desperately trying to throw in more troops, but these troops aren't made of the same hard metal that the other ones was, so the grinding process is even quicker. And it's becoming obvious to everybody that we can't lie about this anymore. We can't spin away what's happening. Even if the Ukrainian government wants to pretend that they're winning, the results we're seeing on the battlefield now are so overwhelmingly in favor of the Russian narrative that we now have to start realizing that we're going to look like Baghdad Bob. Remember the Iraqi? There's no Americans in Baghdad while tanks are driving in the background. Well, that's what's going to happen to the New York Times and the Washington Post and the American establishment. The Ukrainians are winning while Russian tanks are driving down the streets of Kiev. So I think they're desperately right now trying to catch up to reality. That's why you see this massive shift. Look, if they were a responsible news organization, no responsible news organization could see their meter go pink, meaning pro-Ukraine, pro-Ukraine, pro-Ukraine. Oh my goodness, the Russians are telling the truth. When you see that needle go like this, that means that there's a lot of manufactured data here, a lot of propaganda, a lot of lies. What should have happened is their needle should always be in the middle, trying to be responsible, trying to tell both sides, but then the needle points gradually towards the side that's where the facts are accumulating, the facts support. And the needle should have always been pointing towards Russia like this. But to go from Ukraine, to Russia like that tells you that the New York Times has been caught out in a massive, massive disinformation campaign, and they're desperately trying to spin it to make it look like, oh, we just now realized that this is happening. But as Beth Sanders said, they've never known. Actually, I can tell you that they do know. I mean, come on, Beth, you're a former national intelligence officer. Pick up the phone, call the guys who are counting the dead tanks on the battlefield, call the guys who are monitoring the desperate cries for help from the Ukrainian soldiers on the front line. The U.S. knows damn well what's going on inside Ukraine.
Well, one of the things we talked about on last week's show about this article was that the intelligence community in this New York Times piece basically says, and I'm just calling out this one piece because I think it's emblematic of a number of pieces we've seen. I'm just calling out the New York Times piece. We could have talked about the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the whole lot of them, right? But this piece, I think, hits a number of points. And so one of the things that was said in this article is, well, we don't want to start spying on Ukraine to get accurate information, so we're still relying on them to tell us. And I just said on my show, that's total bullshit. We absolutely have been spying on them. How does anyone watching right now not think we've been spying on them? I mean, heck, we installed a puppet government. Like, they're ours. Am I wrong about that, or am I just being conspiratorial?
No, you're 100% right. It's more than that. We have a hand in glove relationship with their intelligence services. CIA has had one of the largest stations in Kiev, because it wasn't just about being in Ukraine. It's about using Ukraine as a window into Russia. The interactivity between Ukraine and Russia was immense, and so we had our CIA office there, and they were literally using their post in Kiev to spy on Russia. So it's a massive, massive effort. And then we got involved in what's called information operations or information warfare, where we work with the Ukrainian intelligence services to shape public perception by disseminating misinformation, lies, sometimes disseminating the truth. It's not always. Russia's not perfect. Russia makes mistakes, and sometimes it's used to take these mistakes and bring them to light. But we had been working with the Ukrainian intelligence services hand in glove for many years prior to this, trying to spin what was going on in Donbass, trying to spin the Crimea, etc. So when this conflict started, we already had in place a gigantic machine where the CIA is working with the Ukrainians to spin this data. And the one thing about spinmeisters is they have to know what their objective is, which means they have to know what reality is. So the CIA knows exactly what the truth is on the ground. Their job is now to shape perception so that the truth is either highlighted where it needs to be highlighted or suppressed where it needs to be suppressed. So we have absolute insight into the thinking of the Ukrainian government via our connections with the intelligence service. But then there's more. We provide real-time combat intelligence now to the Ukrainian services. And what that means is that somewhere in Poland, I believe, there's a joint command center where U.S. and NATO officials are sitting together with their Ukrainian counterparts. And they're receiving real-time intelligence information from the various NATO sensors that are out there. Then there's a NATO-only, US-only section that quickly, protects sources and methods, but then gets the data over to the Ukrainians, who then work with the Americans on the big battle map on how best to get this information to the people who need it. And I'm telling you, having done this process, that means you have total information awareness of the reality of the battlefield. You know everything. The U.S. knows everything about the Ukrainian situation. We are side by side with the Ukrainians. We know what they need, how they need it, where they need it, why they need it. So for the New York Times to sit there and quote intelligence people saying, oh, well, we don't want to spy on the Ukrainians, we're dependent. Lies, lies, lies. We know everything about Ukraine, and we've known it from day one. The fact is, though, remember, the same people that are spinning out to the New York Times are the same people who are releasing lies to the American people to shape perception. The U.S. intelligence community is no longer in the business of collecting data, assessing data, informing U.S. policymakers. They're now in the business of deceiving the American public, which, frankly speaking, as an American citizen means they no longer have a right to exist. If you're calling yourself an intelligence officer today and you're in the employ of the United States government, you are involved in any aspect of a process that misinforms, disinforms the American public, resign now, because you've lost all reason to exist. I've lost trust and faith in you. You're useless in my book.
As Rand Paul said a few weeks ago during a hearing on the Disinformation Governance Board in front of Michael Chertoff, who is now going to be running this thing instead of Nina Jankowicz, which is arguably much, much worse. He said, there is no bigger purveyor of disinformation in world history than the United States government. So we're going to trust the United States government to now oversee a disinformation governance board? I mean, this is where we're at right now, Scott.
It's Orwellian, literally Orwellian, yeah.
So, and one thing I just want to pick up on what you just pointed out, which is incredibly illuminating on the battlefield and the data, the real time data. I spoke to a decorated NATO pilot and former Marine, and explained to me that we can send them all the HIMAR equipment we want, but and we're giving them the data. These targets need to be analyzed specifically, and someone needs to be providing these coordinates for them to strike. So they've gotten the coordinates, they're getting the NATO data, they're getting the HIMARS, they're getting these heavy weapons that the United States continues to funnel in. They're coming in from Spain and other places. So we're sending them the equipment. But it sounds like they don't have the people, and these people are surrendering. So what's happening with that critical question, which is the people that can accurately use this equipment, these experienced people? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Let's start off again by underscoring the fact that the Ukrainian active duty armed forces at the start of this conflict were around 260,000, 180,000 of whom were combat arms, ground forces. That's a lot of guys. They've suffered a lot of casualties. I mean, I think right now we could safely say that over 50, 60,000 Ukrainians have fallen in this war, dead or wounded.
Wow.
That's a lot. And I think the number is actually much higher now because remember I talked about grinding it down and suddenly, it's going like that. So I think that casualties now are just spiking. Now, many of these casualties, however, are not from the 180,000 regular forces, the well-trained forces. They're from the reserves and the territorial defense organizations. We've seen the Ukrainians throw these poorly trained units into the front line so that they can withdraw from the front line the regular units to be re-equipped, retrained, et cetera. And so, the Ukrainians right now are being very cynical. They're sacrificing untrained manpower to buy time so that the better trained soldiers can be pulled out of the front line, sent to south of France for a couple of weeks to be trained on the Caesar artillery system, sent to Grafenwold, Germany, so they can be trained for 3 to 4 weeks by American, military personnel, sent to Poland so they can be trained by the Brits and others on these systems, and then they come back. So it's, the Ukrainians do have the manpower still, well-trained manpower. The people that are being trained by NATO, by the United States, outside of Ukrainian territory are solid soldiers. These are guys who know artillery. They do Soviet-era artillery, but they understand the fundamentals of artillery. They're combat veterans because they've been involved in, before they got pulled out, they had been fighting the Russians head-on-head for months. So, I still believe that the Ukrainians have some fight left in them. I think, and we've made them even more lethal because we've taken these soldiers who are experienced, capable soldiers. We've trained them significantly. Early on, I heard about, what I call train the trainer programs, where they'd be taken out and be given, 2, 3, 4, 5 day quick training course and then sent back in. I went, that's never going to work. These weapon systems are too complex. It's just not going to work. And I think NATO quickly realized that's not going to work either. That's why you're taking them out and giving them 40 days of training. Now, if you take somebody who's an experienced soldier, combat veteran, who knows artillery, the principles of artillery, it's not like you're sending them back for basic training. You're sending them for advanced training on a specific system and the training is provided by experts on that system. 40 days is sufficient to learn that system. And they're coming back and they're being employed. Now, they're not going to change the outcome of this war. They're not. What they are going to do, however, is kill Russians and destroy Russian equipment. Not in sufficient numbers to tilt the battle in favor of Ukraine, but that's never been the goal. Remember, Lloyd Austin speaking, our goal is to achieve strategic victory by making this war cost Russia so much they will never be able to carry out a similar action elsewhere in Europe. So we, the United States, at a time when we say we're here to help the Ukrainians, are literally using the Ukrainians as cannon fodder for the sole purpose of killing Russians, not for Ukraine to win, but to punish Russia. That's the most cynical approach I can think. And it's, if I were the Russians, I would never forget, never forgive. Remember, we killed a guy named Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian Quds Force guy, whom we accused of providing training assistance, etc., to Iraqi insurgents in southern Iraq in the 2005, 2006, 2007 time period. They killed 500 to 600 Americans, and we never forgave him. And we hated him so much that we hunted him down and assassinated him. Well, what do you think's going through the minds of the Russians right now, knowing that the Americans aren't trying to help the Ukrainians win? They're simply giving the Ukrainians the tools necessary to kill more Russians. So if you're a Russian mother and you just lost your son, you're happy about this with America? If you're a Russian wife who just lost her husband, a Russian sister who just lost her brother, a grandmother who lost her grandchildren, I think we're teaching an entire generation of Russians who hate and despise us, not because we're supporting Ukraine. Because if we're supporting Ukraine in an honest effort to have Ukraine win the war, the Russians are adults. They have big boy pants and big girl pants they put on every morning. They understand the rules of the game. They understand that's how the world works. But if you're so cynical that you're simply providing arms in support of a losing cause, sacrificing not only the Ukrainians that you're arming, but you're using that to kill Russians, that's despicable. And who knows what the Russians are going to do down the road? Are they building a list of American generals and politicians who are our equivalents of Qasem Soleimani that need to be assassinated down the road because of the crimes we've committed against Russia? I don't know. I'm not encouraging it. I would never support that. I'm just saying that we need to think sometimes about what we do and how it's perceived by the rest of the world. We may be able to lie to the American people and say we're providing this weaponry to help the brave Ukrainians defend themselves against the Russians. But our government knows that's a lie. Our military knows that's a lie. The Ukrainians know that's a lie. And the Russians know that's a lie. The only people buying into that, apparently, are the American public.
It's incredibly troubling. Incredibly troubling. Scott, I want to get you out of here on this, which is something that happened about a week ago. But I thought I wanted to get your take on this, and I'm sure you saw this. I'm going to play this clip. This was President George W. Bush at the, I don't know if you like the George W. Bush Institute, which I'm not even sure what you do at the George W. Bush Institute. But here he was, and I want to play this, and I just want to get your take on this.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway.
Your thoughts on that?
I mean, first of all, I'd be a liar if I said I didn't smile when that happened. But then I quickly corrected myself and I became angry because that son of a bitch, that former president of the United States of America, lied his way into a war that cost thousands of American servicemen their lives. Tens of thousands were maimed, even more, hundreds of thousands psychologically traumatized by what he put them through. And then there's, of course, the millions of Iraqis who have lost their lives, lost their livelihood, had their lives forever ruined by this despicable human being. He lied his way into a war. He is everything he was accusing the Russians of being and worse, because Russia doesn't have our history of democracy. Russia doesn't have the Constitution. Russia doesn't have ostensible checks and balances. America did, and yet this man abused that system and led us into a war. And now he's up there chuckling about the Freudian slip he made. No, he knows what the truth is about Iraq. He knows that he lied, and he's not even willing to be honest about it in this late stage in his life. I'm troubled by that man. I'm troubled that we still revere him. I'm troubled that he still, that history is treating him so kindly. I mean, maybe all mass murderers should take up painting in their retirement to soothe the edges of the reality of who they are and what they are. He's pond scum. He's worse than pond scum. He's American pond scum that used the American people, the American Constitution, and abused the trust that we put into our military to get them involved in a conflict that has cost America and the world so much. That's my thoughts on that clip.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, just to put a button on that, we're seeing, it feels like, I don't want to say a rehabilitation. I don't know what the right word is, but we saw Tony Blair is popping back up again, and he's giving conferences now and inviting Emmanuel Macron to lend legitimacy to him with his new conference on moderate government, and George W. Bush is giving speeches and popping back up again, and you're seeing these guys, and there's like a nostalgia that the mainstream media is creating, and it's really troubling. These are the guys that led us into these wars where millions of people died, and they lied right to our faces, and I just don't understand how the media goes along with it.
Well, remember, the lies that these guys told were fed to us by the media. The New York Times was complicit in the crimes of the Bush administration. All the British media was complicit in the crimes of the Blair administration. So what appears to be the rehabilitation of Bush and Blair is also the rehabilitation of these media outlets, who, by softening the harshness of the truth about these two awful men, are likewise softening the reality of the harshness of their failure at that time to do their job, that their culpability in colluding with Bush and Blair and their respective governments in selling the threat of weapons of mass destruction, knowing that it would be used to engage in an illegal war of aggression and occupation of Iraq. So this is this is the media rehabilitating itself using Blair and Bush as the vehicle.
Well, Scott, it's been incredible to have you here on the show. I want people to connect with you. You've got a great Telegram channel. Obviously, you've been banned